Oof. Sorry about that. I was very naughty, and I should have watched the stream, but I didn't. But here we are now. Welcome back to Low Energy Videos. We are going to be playing Fallout 4, continuing on with our character, but also listening to the audiobook we've been listening to for the past good few episodes. Legacy of Ashes, The History of the CIA, Part 2, also known as The End. We are 2 hours, 43 minutes, and 25 seconds into it, out of a 9 hour and 58 and 15 seconds video. Now, before we get into that, a few things. Number one, this will be uploaded on YouTube. If so, hi YouTube. Look into the description there and you will find the links to all the good stuff, including, most importantly, a link to this audio. If you like it, go and support the original release. I am also looking for any future videos, audio, I should say, once this is finished. So if you've got any suggestions, throw them my way. I just need to not be in trouble with copyright. It can be a political debate, it can be a stand-up comic, it can be an album that you think is very cool. Or ideally, it can be another book. And if I could make a humble suggestion, maybe, just maybe, could it be something fun this time? The last few stuff we've listened to have been not fun. Oh, that's what that is. Let me ring. And if you're wondering what this is, that's the actual logo on this thing. It's threadbare. I need to throw it out. I've got a new one now. But listen. Follow, subscribe, linky links, all that good stuff. As for the game, well, should pop up now. There it is. We were upgrading Piper's outfit, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's elements to it I like, elements to it I don't like. So where's the vertibird? What the hell happened here? We have ourselves a mod failure of some kind. Fine. Well, my character's good. Yeah, generic. Alright. So let's get the audiobook started, shall we? As always, this will be more focused on the audiobook than the game. So do keep that in mind. You want me to play the game? There's plenty of other stuff out there that have been playing Fallout 4. You want to listen to the audiobook and drop it? Well, like I said, the link's in the doobly-doo. And you know what? Because I'm be kind of crazy not to. Here, also popping into the chat on the Twitch. There. Now that said, let's find out what those kooky CIA cats are up to.
War was a just cause. The fall of Richard Nixon showed that these noble lies would no longer serve in a democracy. Bill Colby leaped at the chance to renew the CIA's standing with the White House, for he knew that the assault on secrecy threatened the agency's survival.
Bullets for me.
He had cultivated Ford from the moment he became vice president, delivering a copy of the president's daily brief by messenger and keeping him posted on the CIA's secret $400 million project to raise a sunken Soviet submarine from the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The salvage operation failed when the sub broke in two. He wanted Ford to know everything the president knew, he said. We didn't want another situation like when Truman was unaware of the Manhattan Project. But President Ford never telephoned him or sought his private counsel. Ford restored the National Security Council as it was under Eisenhower, and Colby attended, but he was never admitted to the Oval Office alone. Colby tried to become a player on the great issues of the day, but he remained an outsider, with Kissinger and Haig as gatekeepers and guardians. Colby never penetrated the inner circle of the Ford White House, and whatever chance he might have had to repair the CIA's reputation died in December 1974. A New York Times reporter, Seymour Hersh, had uncovered the secret of the agency's spying on Americans. He had gotten the gist of the story from months of reporting, and on Friday, December 20th, 1974, he received a long-sought interview with Colby at headquarters. Colby, who secretly taped the conversation, tried to convince Hirsch that the illegal surveillance was of no great importance.
Yeah, something's
A
broken.
small affair, best left
I didn't do
unspoken.
it.
I think family skeletons are best left where they are, in the closet, he said to Hirsch. But, he conceded, it had happened. Hirsch wrote all night and into Saturday morning. The story ran December 22nd, 1974, on page 1 of the Sunday paper. The banner headline read, "Huge CIA operation reported in U.S. against anti-war forces." Colby tried to protect the agency by laying the issue of illegal domestic surveillance at the doorstep of Jim Angleton, who had been opening first-class mail in partnership with the FBI for 20 years. He called Angleton up to the 7th floor and fired him. Out in the cold, Angleton spent the rest of his life spinning myths about his work. He summed it up when he was asked to explain why the CIA had not fulfilled an order from the White House to destroy the agency's stockpile of poisons. "It is inconceivable," he said, "that a secret arm of the government has to comply with all the overt orders of the government."
Yes, can you imagine?
Dead cats will come out. On Christmas Eve, Colby sent a long note to Kissinger summarizing the secrets compiled at Schlesinger's command. In the wake of Watergate, their release could wreck the agency. Kissinger boiled them down in a 5-page, single-spaced memo to President Ford on Christmas Day. It took Congress a year of investigation, all of 1975, to dig out some of the facts in this memo. Kissinger informed the president that the CIA had indeed spied on the left, wiretapped newspaper reporters and placed them under surveillance, conducted illegal searches, and opened uncounted sacks of mail. But there was much more and far worse. Kissinger did not dare put in writing what he had learned from what he called the horrors book.
That's how you do that.
Some of the CIA's actions clearly were illegal, he warned Ford. Others raised profound moral questions. Though he had served a decade on the small CIA subcommittee in the House of Representatives, President Ford had never heard a whisper of these secrets: domestic spying, mind control, assassination attempts. The conspiracies to commit murder had started in the White House under Eisenhower, the most revered Republican president of the 20th century. Then, on Friday, January 3rd, 1975, Ford received another bulletin, this one from the acting Attorney General of the United States, Lawrence Silberman. Silberman learned that day about the thick file that held the secrets of the CIA's wrongdoing. It lay in Colby's office safe, and Silberman surmised that it held evidence of federal crimes. The nation's highest law enforcement officer mousetrapped the Director of Central Intelligence. He would have to hand over the files, or he might face a charge of obstruction of justice. It was no longer a question of whether Colby wanted to spill the secrets. It was a question of going to prison to protect them. Silberman, later in life a federal appeals court judge and the leader of a devastating investigation of the CIA in 2005, came perilously close to becoming the Director of Central Intelligence himself at this dangerous moment. "Ford asked me to come into the White House to run intelligence, but I declined," Silberman said in an oral history. "I was seriously considered at that point to be CIA director. I did not wish to do that for a whole host of reasons." He knew that the agency was about to face a howling storm. In his January 3rd memo to the president, Silberman raised two issues. One, plans to assassinate certain foreign leaders, which, to say the least, present unique questions. Two, Mr. Helms may have committed perjury during the confirmation hearings on his appointment as ambassador to Iran. Helms had been asked, under oath, about the overthrow of President Allende of Chile. Did the CIA have anything to do with that? "No, sir," Helms had answered. Sworn to secrecy, but sworn to tell the truth. Sworn to secrecy, but sworn to tell the truth. Helms eventually had to stand before a federal judge and face the charge of lying.
They
a
always have
misdemeanor
stuff like
count
that in it.
of failing to tell Congress the whole truth. On the evening of January 3rd, Ford told Kissinger, Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, and Donald Rumsfeld that the CIA would be destroyed if the secrets leaked. At noon on Saturday, January 4th, Helms came to the Oval Office. "Frankly, we are in a mess," Ford told him. The president said that Rockefeller would run a commission to investigate the domestic activities of the CIA, but only the domestic activities. Ford hoped it could hew to that narrow charter. "It would be tragic if it went beyond it," he told Helms. "It would be a shame if the public uproar forced us to go beyond and to damage the integrity of the CIA. I automatically assume what you did was right, unless it's proven otherwise." Helms saw what lay ahead. "A lot of dead cats will come out," he warned the president. "I don't know everything which went on in the agency. Maybe no one does. But I know enough to say that if the dead cats come out, I will participate." Helms tossed one over the White House fence that day, telling
Someone's making a
Kissinger
few
that
mistakes.
Bobby Kennedy had personally managed the assassination plots against Castro. Kissinger passed the news to the president. The horror deepened. Ford had first come to national prominence through his service on the Warren Commission. Now he understood that there were aspects to the Kennedy assassination he had never known, and the missing pieces of the puzzle haunted him. Near the end of his life, he called the agency's withholding of evidence from the Warren Commission unconscionable. "The CIA made a mistake in not giving us all of the data they had available," Ford said. "Their judgment was not good in not giving us the full story." The White House now faced 8 separate congressional investigations and hearings on the CIA. Rumsfeld explained how the White House was going to head them all off at the pass with the Rockefeller Commission, whose members would be Republican and right. One was already listed in his files. Ronald Reagan, political commentator, former president of the Screen Actors Guild, and former governor of California. "What should the final report be?" the president asked. All present agreed in principle that damage control was of the utmost importance. "Colby must be brought under control," Kissinger said. "If he did not stay silent, this stuff will be all over town soon." On January 16, 1975, President Ford hosted a luncheon at the White House for senior editors and the publisher of the New York Times. The president said that it was decidedly not in the national interest to discuss the CIA's past. He said the reputation of every president since Harry Truman could be ruined if the deepest secrets spilled. "Like what?" an editor asked. "Like assassinations," Ford said. Hard to say which was stranger, what the president had said, or that the editors managed to keep the statement off the record. The new Congress, elected 3 months after Nixon's resignation, was the most liberal in memory. "The question is how to plan to meet the investigation of the CIA," President Ford told Rumsfeld on February 21st. Rumsfeld pledged to mount a damage-limiting operation for the president. He took charge of determining how many, if any, of the CIA secrets Ford and Rockefeller would share with Capitol Hill. On March 28th, Schlesinger told the president that it was imperative to cut back on the prominence of CIA operations around the world. "Within the CIA, there is bitter dissension," said Schlesinger, who had helped to sow it. "The clandestine service was full of tired-out old agents, men who might spill secrets. Colby was being too damned cooperative with the Congress. The danger of disclosure was growing by the day." 34. Saigon signing off. On April 2, 1975, Bill Colby warned the White House that the United States was about to lose a war. "Let me get a grasp on the situation," Kissinger said. "Is there anywhere the South Vietnamese have a chance of establishing a line and of stopping the North Vietnamese?"
Nope.
"North of Saigon, here," Colby said, pointing to a line on a map. "That's hopeless," Schlesinger shouted. Was South Vietnam going to collapse? Kissinger asked. It seemed inevitable to Colby. "I think Martin, Ambassador Graham Martin, should begin preparing a plan of evacuation, Kissinger said. I think it's our duty to get the people who believed in us out. We have to take out these people who participated in the Phoenix program. This was the paramilitary campaign of arrest, interrogation, and torture that Colby had helped run as a civilian, with the rank of ambassador
can't let
from
that paper trail
1968
find
to
you back, can you?
1971. At a minimum, Phoenix had killed more than 20,000 Viet Cong suspects. The real question now, said Colby, is do we try for a redoubt around Saigon, or negotiate a face-saving, possibly life-saving settlement so as to evacuate the capital without bloodshed? No negotiations, Kissinger said. Not as long as I am in this chair.
Then throw him out
Keep
the chair.
the weapons flowing to Saigon and let the North and the South work it out. We can save nothing, he said. Nothing but lives, Colby replied. But Kissinger was adamant. He would not negotiate a peaceful end to the war.
Piece of shit.
On April
Glad you
9th,
did.
Colby went back to the White House to try to focus President Ford on the fact that communist armies were closing in on the capitals of South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. 20 years of struggle by the military and intelligence forces of the United States were going down the drain. The communists have begun a new round of fighting, with Saigon as the ultimate target, Colby told the President and the National Security Council on April 9th. The United States needed to start evacuating everyone it could, Americans and Vietnamese, as soon as possible, he said. There would surely be vengeance when Saigon fell. Thousands of Americans and tens of thousands of political, military, and intelligence allies among the South Vietnamese were at risk if they remained. The North Vietnamese now have 18 infantry divisions in South Vietnam, Colby said. We believe Hanoi will take whatever action is necessary to force the war to an early conclusion, probably by early summer. He was off by 2 months. The city of Saigon, where 6,000 American military officers, spies, diplomats, and government aid workers still labored, would fall within 3 weeks. Colby told the president that we should ask Congress to commit money to carry out the pledge to let the Vietnamese, perhaps 1 to 2 million, leave. This would have been the biggest emergency evacuation in the history of the United States. Colby's warning did not register anywhere in Washington, not at the White House, not with Congress, not in the Pentagon, and not in the mind of the American ambassador in Saigon. One man understood all too well, the Saigon station chief, Tom Polgar. It has been a long fight, and we have lost. At 4 a.m. on April 29, 1975, Polgar awoke to the sound of rockets and artillery. The airport was under fire. 7 Air America helicopters, the CIA's shuttle service in South Vietnam, were destroyed. Polgar had hundreds of people to look after. The Americans who worked for him were one problem. The Vietnamese who worked for the CIA and their families were another. They were desperate to leave, but getting fixed-wing aircraft in and out of the airport would be impossible now. Polgar dressed quickly in a blue shirt and tan slacks, instinctively put his passport in his pocket, and sped to the American embassy. The streets of Saigon, a city of 4 million people, were empty, under 24-hour curfew. He called Ambassador Martin. Suffering from emphysema and bronchitis, Martin was reduced to anguished whispers. Polgar then contacted Kissinger and the American commander-in-chief in the Pacific, Admiral Noel Gaylor, the former director of the National Security Agency. He received new orders from Washington, pushed the evacuation of non-essential personnel to the utmost. Kissinger offered no instructions beyond that as to who would stay and who would go, and how they would leave. The South Vietnamese army was collapsing into chaos. The national police dissolved. The once silent streets were anarchy. President Ford ordered a reduction of the embassy from 600 people to 150. 50 among those to remain were CIA officers. Polgar did not quite envision the North Vietnamese allowing a robust CIA station to go on working after Saigon fell. Inside the embassy, Polgar saw people in states of rage smashing and trampling photographs of Nixon and Kissinger. The embassy had become, in Polgar's words, a 33-ring circus without a ringmaster. At 11:38 a.m., Ford ordered the American mission in Saigon to shut down. Now all Americans had to be out of the city by nightfall. The embassy was surrounded by thousands of panicked Vietnamese, a wall of desperate
People were
people.
clinging on the side of
There was only
helicopters.
one way in and out, a secret passageway from the parking lot to the garden of the French embassy. Ambassador Martin used it to round up his wife and their servants. Polgar called home. His maid told him he had visitors: a deputy prime minister, a 3-star general, the chief of the nation's communications intelligence agency, the chief of protocol, senior military officers and their families, and many more Vietnamese who had worked with the CIA. 3 hours after President Ford issued the evacuation order, the first American helicopters arrived from 80 miles offshore. The Marine pilots performed with skill and daring, shuttling out about 1,000 Americans and close to 6,000 Vietnamese. A famous photograph shows one of the last helicopters leaving Saigon, perched on a rooftop, as a trail of people climb a ladder to safety. That photo, for many years, was mislabeled as a shot of the embassy, but in fact it was a CIA safe house, and those were Polgar's friends clambering aboard. Polgar burned all the CIA's files, cables, and code books that evening. Not long after midnight, he composed his farewell. This will be final message from Saigon Station. It has been a long fight, and we have lost. Those who fail to learn from history are forced to repeat it. Let us hope that we will not have another Vietnam experience and that we have learned our lesson. Saigon signing off. Then he blew up the machine that sent the message. 30 years later, Polgar remembered the final moments of the American war in Vietnam. As we stepped up the narrow metal stairs to the helicopter pad on the roof, we knew we were leaving behind thousands of people in the embassy's logistics compound. We all knew how we felt, leaders of a defeated cause. 15 years of hard work that turned to nothing. The CIA's long war in Laos came to an end 2 weeks later in a valley surrounded by tall shafts of limestone. The communists surrounded the agency's central outpost in Long Tieng. The ridge above the valley was covered with North Vietnamese soldiers. Tens of thousands of the Hmong, the CIA's fighters and their families, were gathering at the primitive airstrip hoping for a flight. The agency had no plans to save them after 15 years of paramilitary missions. One CIA officer remained at Long Tieng. Jerry Daniels, a one-time Montana smoke jumper known to his Hmong friends as Sky. He was 33 years old, and he had been upcountry for close to 10 years. He was the case officer for General Vang Pao, the military and political leader of the Hmong, and the agency's greatest asset in Laos since 1960. Daniels was one of 7 CIA officers, Bill Lair and Ted Shackley included, who had been awarded the Order of the Million Elephants and the White Parasol by the King of Laos in gratitude for their work. Daniels pleaded with Dan Arnold, the station chief in Laos, to send planes to Long Tieng. It was imperative that the evacuation proceed without delay, Arnold said in an oral history. But there weren't any planes. Of course, the authorization for an airlift had to go to Washington, and this was done with the highest precedence, Arnold said. This went from CIA to the White House. Washington was repeatedly requested to urgently arrange for additional airlift capability because we had drawn down so heavily. The problem was occasioned by delays at the highest political level. On May 12, 1975, the CIA scoured up the last 2 C-46 aircraft in Thailand. The planes, roughly the size of a DC-3, belonged to Continental Air Services, a private contractor for the agency. Over the years, hundreds of planes of that size had landed on the Long Tieng airstrip carrying cargo, but they always left empty, barely clearing the high ridgeline. No one had ever flown a loaded C-46 out of Long Tieng. The planes were built to carry 35 passengers. With twice that number aboard and thousands clamoring to get on each flight, they slowly began the evacuation. In Bangkok, on the morning of May 13th, Air Force Brigadier General Heine Adderholt, chief of the U.S. Military Assistance Command in Thailand, got a call from a stranger. General Adderholt, who had worked alongside the CIA on air operations for 20 years, ran the only functioning American military operation remaining in Southeast Asia. The guy did not identify himself by name, the general remembered. He said the U.S. was abandoning the Hmong at Long Tieng. He used that word, abandoning. The stranger asked Adderholt to send a 4-engine C-130, a mid-sized cargo transport plane, to save the Hmong. Adderholt somehow found an American pilot who was minutes from clearing the departure lounge at the Bangkok airport and offered him $5,000 in cash to fly the C-130 to Long Tieng.
Nice.
Then he called the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General George Brown, for authority to carry out the mission. That afternoon, the C-130 arrived. Hundreds of Hmong loaded themselves within a few minutes. The plane departed and returned the next morning. The CIA's Jerry Daniels was running the evacuation, serving as bodyguard to General Vang Pao, working as flight controller at the airstrip, and holding a lifeline for 50,000 panicked people. Daniels and Vang Pao could not be seen to abandon the troops and their families. When the C-130 returned on the morning of May 14th, thousands of Hmong ran for its rear cargo door. It was a scene of fury and despair. Vang Pao stole away to a helicopter landing zone a few miles away. A CIA crew spirited him away. Daniels procured a plane for himself. The flight log reads, "All was in turmoil. We took off at 10:47, and this ended the secret CIA base at Long Tieng, Laos." A CIA contract pilot on the scene, Captain Jack Knotts, recorded an audio tape memorializing the final minutes of the long war in Laos. Daniels, carrying a briefcase and a case of Olympia beer, rolled up to the landing zone in his white and blue Ford Bronco. He stepped out of the car and then stopped dead. "He won't get in the chopper," Knotts said. "He doesn't want to leave yet." He gets his briefcase out of the back, and then he starts talking on the radio. He messes around, and finally, and this is a very bad thing because he's been there for so long, he salutes. He comes to attention, just like he's saluting the Jeep, but he is really saluting 10 or 15 years of hard work that turned to nothing. Richard Helms called Laos the war we won. It was hard to see how. Ford and Kissinger forced a political arrangement that certified communist control of the country. "And then we left," said the CIA's Dick Holm, who had started his 35-year career at the CIA in Laos. Those among the Hmong who survived wound up in refugee camps or in exile. "Their way of life has been destroyed," Holm wrote. "They can never return to Laos." The United States, he said, failed to assume the moral responsibility that we owed to those who worked so closely with us during those tumultuous years. Jerry Daniels died of gas poisoning at his apartment in Bangkok 7 years after the evacuation of Long Tieng. He was 40 years old. No one knows if he took his own life. 35. Ineffective and scared. The CIA was being sacked like a conquered city. Congressional committees were combing through its files, the Senate focusing on covert action, the House homing in on failures of espionage and analysis. In the streets of Washington, handmade posters of Bill Colby had appeared, inscribed with skulls and crossbones and the ace of spades. The agency's senior officers feared personal and professional ruin. The White House feared political destruction. In the Oval Office on October 13, 1975, the president and his men met to weigh the damage. "Any document which officially shows American involvement in an assassination is a foreign policy disaster," Colby told the president. "They also want to go into sensitive covert operations, like Laos. Would the White House go to the courts to stop Congress? We are better off with a political confrontation than a legal one," said Don Rumsfeld. To prepare for that fight, the president shook up his cabinet at the end of October 1975. The move was instantly called the Halloween Massacre. Jim Schlesinger was dismissed, and Don Rumsfeld became Secretary of Defense. Dick Cheney took his place as White House Chief of Staff, and in an uncharacteristically Machiavellian move, Ford neutralized a potentially troublesome challenger for the 1976 presidential nomination by firing Bill Colby and making George Herbert Walker Bush the next Director of Central Intelligence. It was, on its face, a strange choice. Bush was not a general, an admiral, or a spy. He knew almost nothing about intelligence. He was a politician, pure and simple. The son of Prescott Bush, a patrician U.S. Senator from Connecticut who had been a good friend to Allen Dulles, he had moved to Texas to seek his fortune in the oil business. He served 2 terms in Congress. He ran for the Senate twice and lost. He had been United Nations ambassador for 22 months and Nixon's relentlessly cheery Republican National Committee chairman during Watergate. In August 1974, Ford had come very close to making Bush vice president. His failure to win the job was the worst blow of his political life. His consolation prize was a choice of prestigious ambassadorships, and he had chosen China. From Beijing, Bush had seen the struggles of the CIA through a thick prism, relying on the radio reports of the Voice of America and clippings from week-old newspapers. But his political instincts told him what the job had to offer. Bury Bush at the CIA, he asked himself. It's a graveyard for politics, he wrote. He told Ford, I see this as the total end of any political future. The prospect depressed him, but his sense of propriety impelled him to say yes. Within weeks after becoming director, at the end of January 1976, Bush discovered that he loved the agency. The secrecy, the camaraderie, the gadgetry, the international intrigue. The CIA was skull and bones with $1 billion budget. This is the most interesting job I've ever had, he wrote to a friend in March. In less than 11 months at the helm, he bucked up morale at headquarters, defended the CIA against all critics, and deftly used the agency to build a political base for his soaring ambitions. Beyond that, he accomplished little. From the start, Bush ran headlong into Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, who had control over 80% of the intelligence budget. That money belongs to me, Rumsfeld said. Spy satellites and electronic surveillance and military intelligence were all battlefield support for American soldiers. Though the American military was in full retreat, Rumsfeld stiff-armed Bush. He was strongly disinclined to let the Director of Central Intelligence have a say in shaping the secret spending. Rumsfeld was paranoid about the CIA and, convinced that the agency was out to spy on him, cut off long-standing channels of communication and cooperation between the Pentagon and the CIA, the veteran analyst George Carver said in a CIA oral history interview. The recruitment of new officers in the wake of Watergate and Vietnam was extraordinarily difficult. The agency was top-heavy, with middle-aged bureaucrats playing for time. Bush eased out 12 of the 16 most senior officers at headquarters to try to make some headroom. He wanted to name his own chief of the clandestine service, so he called in Colby's chief, Bill Nelson, and said it was time for him to leave. Nelson saluted and left, but not before dropping a memo on Bush's desk that told him that the clandestine service had 2,000 too many officers. Bush, in the tradition of Allen Dulles, buried the study. The CIA was cut off. This is a turbulent and troublesome period for the agency, Bush wrote to President Ford on June 1, 1976. The intensive investigations by both houses of the Congress for more than a year now have resulted in extensive public disclosures of past and current covert action operations. The investigations led the Senate to create an Intelligence Oversight Committee while Bush was director. The House set one up a year later. If only the president could find a way to shield the CIA from Congress, Bush wrote, then covert action operations will continue to make the positive contribution to our foreign policy that they have made over the past 28 years. But the agency, under a newly vigilant Congress, had very few new covert action operations underway. In a written response to questions from the author, Bush contended that the congressional investigations did long-lasting damage to the agency. They set back our liaison relationships around the world. The CIA's links with foreign intelligence services, the source of so much of the information it gathered, and they caused many people abroad to pull away from cooperating with the CIA. Worst of all, he said, they devastated the morale of perhaps the finest group of public servants this country has. Continuing failures in the field also sapped the CIA's spirit in 1976. Among the biggest was in Angola. 2 months after the fall of Saigon, President Ford approved a big new operation to secure Angola against communism. The country had been Portugal's biggest prize in Africa, but Lisbon's leaders had been among the worst of the European colonialists, and they sacked Angola as they withdrew. The country was coming apart as rival forces went to war. The CIA shipped $32 million in cash and $16 million worth of weapons to Angola through the agency's great ally, President Mobutu of the Congo. The weapons went to an unruly gang of anti-communist guerrillas commanded by Mobutu's brother-in-law and aligned with the white South African government. The program was aided by President Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia, a genial leader who had long received under-the-table support from the United States and the CIA. It was coordinated at Kissinger's State Department by a talented young diplomat, Frank G. Wisner, Jr., the son and namesake of the late Chief of Covert Operations. We had been forced out of Vietnam, Wisner said. There was a real concern on the part of the administration that the United States would now be tested by the forces of communism across the world. Were we going to see a new, seemingly communist-led offensive move in, take over oil-rich Angola, and begin to carry the Cold War into southern Africa? Or were we going to try to stop it? We weren't going to be able to walk down to Congress in the aftermath of Vietnam and say, look, let's send American military trainers and equipment over there to Mobutu. So Kissinger and the president made the decision to go to the agency, Wisner said. But the CIA-backed troops in Angola faltered, and their enemies, strongly supported by Moscow and Havana, took control of the capital. Kissinger ordered up another $28 million in secret support. There was no money left in the CIA's contingency budget. Early on in Bush's short year at the CIA, Congress publicly banned covert support for the Angolan guerrillas and killed the operation while it was in progress. Nothing of the kind had ever happened before. The CIA was cut off, and we were driven back, Wisner said. I feel like I have been had. On the bicentennial day of July 4th, 1976, Bush prepared to meet the governor of Georgia at a hotel in Hershey, Pennsylvania. He had been extraordinarily responsive when Jimmy Carter requested intelligence briefings from the CIA even before winning the Democratic presidential nomination. No candidate had ever made such a request so early in the game. Bush and his National Intelligence Deputy, Dick Lemon, who had grown so frustrated watching Allen Dulles hefting reports instead of reading them, found Carter extremely interested. Their discussion ranged from spy satellites to the future of white minority rule in Africa. They agreed that the briefings could continue later in July at Carter's home in the hamlet of Plains, Georgia. The director had a hard time getting there. The CIA's Gulfstream jet could not handle the sod airstrip in Plains. The agency sought logistical help from the Pentagon and learned that Bush would have to take a helicopter to Peterson Field. The CIA aircrew checked their maps. Where the hell was Peterson Field? Another phone call to Plains, and they understood. Peterson's Field was some farmer's 40 acres on the edge of town. The 6-hour session touched on Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, Libya, Rhodesia, and Angola. China took 30 minutes. The Soviet Union took 10 times as long. The CIA's men talked all afternoon and into the evening. Carter, who had been a nuclear engineer in the Navy, grasped the arcane details of the American strategic arsenal. He was particularly interested in the evidence spy satellites obtained about Soviet weapons, and he understood that the intelligence they gleaned would play a vital role in arms control. He learned that the Soviets would never show their hand with an accurate statement of the size of their nuclear forces. The American side had to come to the negotiating table and tell the Soviets how many missiles they had and how many we had. This gave Carter pause. The notion that the Soviets lied seemed to be a new idea to him. Bush assured him that the photographs provided by the first generation of spy satellites had provided Presidents Nixon and Ford with the information they needed to pursue SALT, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty with the Soviets, and to keep a close eye on whether the Soviets would abide by their agreements. A new generation of satellites was coming online that summer. Code-named Keyhole, they provided real-time television images instead of slow-to-develop photos. The CIA's Science and Technology Division had been working on Keyhole for years, and it was a great breakthrough. Carter's running mate, Senator Walter Mondale of Minnesota, asked about covert action and the agency's liaisons with foreign intelligence services. Mondale had been a member of the Church Committee, the Senate panel that investigated the CIA. Its final report had come out 2 months before. The committee is remembered today chiefly for its chairman's statement that the agency had been a rogue elephant, a pronouncement that badly missed the point by absolving the presidents who had driven the elephant.
True.
Bush, infuriated by the very existence of the Church Committee, refused to answer Mondale's questions. 8 CIA officers joined Bush in planes 2 weeks later, sitting in a circle in Carter's family room as his daughter and her cat wandered in and out. To their surprise, Carter seemed to have a highly nuanced understanding of the world. When Carter and Ford went head-to-head in the first televised presidential debates since Kennedy and Nixon, the governor cleaned the president's clock on foreign policy. He also took a hard swipe at the agency, saying, "Our system of government, in spite of Vietnam, Cambodia, CIA, Watergate, is still the best system of government on earth."
Why?
On November 19, 1976, there was one final awkward meeting between Bush and President-elect Carter in planes. Bush wanted to be kept on at the CIA, Carter remembered. "If I had agreed to that, he never would have become president. His career would have gone off on a whole different track." Bush's memo of the meeting shows that he revealed a handful of ongoing operations to the president-elect, including the CIA's financial support for heads of state such as King Hussein of Jordan and President Mobutu of the Congo, and strongmen such as Manuel Noriega, the future dictator of Panama.
Hell yeah, Noriega.
Bush observed
drug
that
money.
Carter seemed strangely turned off. His impression was correct. The president-elect found the CIA's subsidies for foreign leaders reprehensible. By the end of 1976, Bush was in bad odor with some of his former fans at the agency. He had made a baldly political decision to let a team of neoconservative ideologues, howling right-wingers, Dick Lemon called them, rewrite the CIA's estimates of Soviet military forces. William J. Casey, the most vociferous member of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, had been talking with some of his friends and associates in the intelligence community. They were convinced that the CIA was dangerously underestimating Soviet nuclear strength. Casey and his fellow members of the advisory board pressed President Ford to let an outside group write their own Soviet estimate. The team, whose members were deeply disenchanted with détente and handpicked by the Republican right, included General Daniel O. Graham, America's leading advocate of missile defense, and Paul Wolfowitz, a disillusioned arms control negotiator and a future Deputy Secretary of Defense. In May 1976, Bush approved Team B with a cheery scribble, "Let her fly, OK, GB." The debate was highly technical, but it boiled down to a single question.
Terrific.
What is Moscow up to? Team B portrayed a Soviet Union in the midst of a tremendous military buildup, when in fact it was cutting military spending. They dramatically overstated the accuracy of Soviet intercontinental ballistic missiles. They doubled the number of backfire bombers the Soviet Union was building. They repeatedly warned of dangers that never materialized, threats that did not exist, technologies that were never created, and, most terrifying of all, the specter of a secret Soviet strategy to fight and win a nuclear war. Then, in December 1976, they selectively shared their findings with sympathetic reporters and opinion columnists. The B team was out of control, Lemon said, and they were leaking all over the place. The uproar Team B created went on for years, fueled a huge increase in Pentagon weapons spending, and led directly to the rise of Ronald Reagan to the top of the list of frontrunners for the 1980 Republican nomination. After the Cold War was over, the agency put Team B's findings to the test. Every one of them was wrong. It was the bomber gap and the missile gap all over again. I feel like I have been had, Bush told Ford, Kissinger, and Rumsfeld at the last National Security Council meeting of the outgoing administration. Intelligence analysis had become corrupted, another tool wielded for political advantage, and it would never recover its integrity. The CIA's estimates had been blatantly politicized since 1969, when President Nixon forced the agency to change its views on the Soviets' abilities to launch a nuclear first strike. I look upon that as almost a turning point from which everything went down. Abbott Smith, who ran the agency's Office of National Estimates under Nixon, said in a CIA oral history interview. The Nixon administration was really the first one in which intelligence was just another form of politics, and that was bound to be disastrous. And I think it was disastrous. John Huizenga, who succeeded Smith in 1971, put it even more bluntly to the CIA's historians, and his thoughts rang true in decades to come, into the 21st century. In retrospect, you see, I really do not believe that an intelligence organization in this government is able to deliver an honest analytical product without facing the risk of political contention. By and large, I think the tendency to treat intelligence politically increased over this whole period, and it's mainly over issues like Southeast Asia and the growth of Soviet strategic forces that were extremely divisive politically. I think it's probably naive in retrospect to have believed what most of us believed at one time, that you could deliver an honest analytical product and have it taken at face value. I think that intelligence has had relatively little impact on the policies that we've made over the years. Relatively none. In certain particular circumstances, perhaps insights and facts that were provided had an effect on what we did, but only in a very narrow range of circumstances. By and large, the intelligence effort did not alter the premises with which political leadership came to office. They brought their baggage and they more or less carried it along. Ideally, what had been supposed was that serious intelligence analysis could assist the policy side to re-examine premises, render policymaking more sophisticated, closer to the reality of the world. Those were the large ambitions which I think were never realized. These thoughts did not trouble the Director of Central Intelligence and the future President of the United States.
I'm here on my own.
The greatness that is CIA. In his farewell to the employees at CIA headquarters, Bush delivered a fond thank you note, as was his wont. I hope I can find some ways in the years ahead to make the American people understand more fully the greatness that is CIA, he wrote. He was the last director of Central Intelligence who received something approaching full support from his troops at headquarters. In their eyes, it was to his great credit that he had tried to save the clandestine service. But to his shame, in the end, he had let the CIA be cowed by politics. I find no degradation in the quality of intelligence analysis, Kissinger said at their last meeting before the inauguration of Jimmy Carter. The opposite is true, however, in the covert action area. We are unable to do it anymore. Henry, you are right, said George Herbert Walker Bush, one of the greatest boosters the CIA ever had. We are both ineffective and scared. Part 5. Victory Without Joy. The CIA under Carter, Reagan, and George H.W. Bush, 1977 to 1993.
Oh yeah, we're getting close.
36. He sought to overthrow their system. Running for president, Jimmy Carter had condemned the CIA as a national disgrace. Once in power, he wound up signing almost as many covert action orders as Nixon and Ford. The difference was that he did it in the name of human rights. The problem was harnessing the agency's atrophied powers to that new mission. His search for a new director of Central Intelligence went poorly. Thomas L. Hughes, the former chief of the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, declined the honor. The nomination went instead to the Kennedy speechwriter Ted Sorensen. Somewhat to my surprise, Carter called me and asked me if I would come on down to Plains, Sorensen recounted. I had a brother who had worked for CIA undercover for years. I went down there and I had a brief conversation with Carter, and the very next day he presented me with the job. But he had been a conscientious objector in World War II, and his nomination died, the first time such a thing had happened in the history of the CIA. Carter failed to give me any support while I was dangling there, Sorensen remembered bitterly. On the third try, the new president selected a near stranger, Admiral Stansfield Turner, commander of the southern flank of NATO, based in Naples, Italy. Turner would be the third admiral in the history of the agency who found the CIA a hard vessel to handle. He was the first to admit his unfamiliarity with the agency, but he was quick to assert his authority. That was not the right way to play the game. Lots of people think President Carter called me in and said, "Clean the place up and straighten it out." He never did that, Turner said. From the very beginning, he was intensely interested in having good intelligence. He wanted to understand the mechanisms, from our satellites to our spies to our methods of analyzing what was happening. He was extremely supportive of the intelligence operations. At the same time, I knew full well, just from his character, that we were to operate within the laws of the United States of America. I knew also that there were ethical limits as to what President Carter would want us to do, and whenever I came close to questioning whether we were close to those limits, I went to him and I got his decisions on it. Almost always, those decisions were to go ahead. The Carter administration had no bias against covert action, Turner said. The CIA had a problem with covert action itself because it was in this state of shock from the criticisms it had gone through. Early on, the clandestine service presented Turner with a life and death dilemma. They came to me and said, "We have an agent almost inside this terrorist organization, but they've asked him to do one more thing to prove his bona fides. He's to go out and murder one of the members of the government. Do we permit him to do that?"
Ooh.
And I said, "No, we pull him out. You know, it's a trade-off. Maybe he could have saved some lives, but I was not going to have the United States party to a murder in order to take that chance. This was a real life right now, and this was the reputation of our country, and I thought that was not the right way to play the game." Turner quickly grasped the basics of the tug-of-war between spies and gadgets. He pulled for machines over men, spending much of his time and energy trying to improve the global coverage of American reconnaissance satellites. He tried to organize the intelligence community into a confederation, creating a coordinating staff and a unified budget. Those who served the cause were appalled at the disarray. "I was in charge of human intelligence collection," remembered John Holdridge, who had been Bush's deputy chief of mission in Beijing before joining the intelligence community staff. I would look at these pie-in-the-sky operations which were presented to me and wonder who in the dickens dreamed these up. They seemed to be so dreadfully impractical and unworkable. Nor did the analysts receive high marks. President Carter pronounced himself puzzled at the fact that the CIA's daily brief recapitulated what he read in the newspapers. He and Turner wondered why the agency's estimates seemed shallow and irrelevant. The agency was off to a rocky start with the new president.
Game. Why you like this?
Carter had changed the long-standing rules. Carter's new national security team had 5 ranking members with 4 different agendas. The president and vice president dreamed of a new American foreign policy founded on the principles of human rights. Secretary of State Cyrus Vance thought arms control was paramount. Secretary of Defense Harold Brown tried to produce a new generation of military and intelligence technology for a few $billions less than the Pentagon planned.
Yeah, game to
National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski was the hawk among
And it is
these
just after an
owls
hour,
and
so
doves.
you know what?
Centuries of Warsaw's
It's short.
woes at the hands of Moscow shaped his thinking.
But my bottom is not doing the best. Why? Simple. I didn't do any exercises outside of all the walking I did around Dublin. And I did a lot of walking around Dublin. So I guess I'll wrap it up here. You will see me tomorrow over on YouTube for UFF. Krendar and I will be returning to do Psychonauts. Looking forward to it. You take care, and next time I see you guys here on Twitch will be for Yakuza. I did a Cyberpunk stream over on YouTube yesterday. I just wanted to do some Cyberpunk. Sue me. But I'm gonna go now. You take care, and all the links are in the doobly-doo and whatever. Sorry for the short one, but I was very ill. Tomorrow I get myself some throat medicine. And I get myself some... Hopefully by then, the last of my nose is rather... Stuffiness will be the thing of the past. But, yeah, that's it. Take care and see you again soon. Bye.